Thank you. Hello again, everybody. Thanks for your patience tonight. We have a full program tonight, and we're going to have a short break in the middle. And then at the end, you'll have a chance to speak with the tellers and ask questions about the stories. So, as I welcome you all to Stories of the Harvest and Stories of Going into the Dark, I want to share just a few thoughts inspired by the writings of mythologist, psychologist Sharon Blackie. Now that the harvest has been gathered and we approach the darkest days of the year, the time of year when our ancestors throughout our past came together and sat close to the fire, shared their food, sang songs, and told stories. Well, this is the season also that can be a time of introspection, a time of dreaming and of solitude, like the bear hibernating in her cave. And finally, it can be a time of transformation when we journey through the dark to find our way back towards the light. So, and I want to make sure, is Philomena ready? Or are we going to go straight to Nan? Somebody needs to unmute and tell me if Philomena's ready. Yes? Hello, Philomena?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, all
Ooh,
right.
I'm here.
So
Okay.
very
La 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 la.
great. So our first teller is Philomena Jordan, and she is a member of the Vancouver Tellers Group that has been around for nearly 40 years. Wow, I feel old. And she organizes their monthly crick cracks. Philomena grew up in Ireland where she listened to the stories of Shawnee Eamon Kelly telling stories on the radio, and tonight that's going to be one of the stories that she tells. Now, when she grew up, the Festival of Samhain, what we call Halloween, was celebrating at the end of the harvest, while the winter's long dark nights marked the beginning of the Celtic year. So, Philomena is feeling this resonating in her because she just got back from Ireland where she was catching up on all the family stories of her 8 siblings. So her accent might just be a little bit stronger tonight. So please welcome Philomena Jordan.
Well, thank you, Alison. Um, yeah, I feel like I've just traveled to Seattle. I jumped in my car and I'm now at Beth's house. And yes, I'll take a deep breath here. And thank you, Alison, for those nice words. And thank you for inviting me. This is a real honor to be part of this celebration tonight. I better have a drink before we start.
And while you're doing that, I still hear sound in the background. So can you mute everybody, Barry?
Yeah, please.
And then Philomena, you may have to unmute when he does that.
All right. I might need Beth's help again. Yeah,
No, I think you're good.
yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. I'm unmuted. Yeah. All right. So, yeah, this is a different scene here, but it'll work with it. Shoo, 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 la, ruin. Shulga sucker agus shulga kyun. Shulga giandaris agus elilam. Excavatum of the one in slum. His name was Gortine, and he lived in the townland of Ballinlough in the county of Roscommon. He never married. He was very shy when he was young, and he thought he was maybe too old when he got the courage. Now, Gertine had a great liking for mushrooms. Mushrooms, he used to call them himself. And when the month of June came around every year, he would be up at the crack of dawn, and he'd be out walking through the fields in his bare feet, looking for the mushrooms. And when he'd find them, he'd take off his cap and he'd pick them and gently put them inside, and he'd take them home and cook them up for his breakfast. Now, one morning when he was out looking for the mushrooms, didn't one of his feet get caught in some tall rushes that were growing in the field? And when he bent down to untangle his foot, a small gold ball rolled out on the grass. He picked it up and he wiped the dirt of it, and he held it up and it glistened in the sunlight. But he couldn't believe his good fortune. He slipped it in his pocket, collected the mushrooms, and went home for his breakfast. He put the gold ball on the table while he was eating the breakfast, and he was thinking to himself where would be a good place to hide it, because he thought it would be a good nest egg for his old age. Now, at the time, he had a stonemason working on his fireplace. And in the houses in those days, there was what was called a cabochine at the side of the fireplace. It was a little cubbyhole where the woman of the house would put her canister of tea, or the man of the house might put his pipe and tobacco. Well, when the stonemason came, he said to him, that cabochine, it's only collecting dust there. He said, why don't you close it up for me? And while the stonemason had his back turned, cutting the flag, Gertine took the ball that he had put into his pocket after breakfast. He took it out and he dipped it in some mortar that was there on the floor. And then he shoved it deep into that cubbyhole. And the stonemason turned round and he placed in the flag and he plastered it over to match the adjoining wall. And Gertine went out to the fields, pleased that his nest egg was safe. The next morning, he was setting out again to pick his mushrooms, but when he got down to the gate, there on the road before him was the most beautiful woman he had ever laid eyes on. She was dressed in a long green cloak, and her eyes sparkled in the morning sunlight. And her hair, she had long black hair that hung in waves around her shoulders, and her cheeks had a rosy glow. He asked her who she was and where she was from, and she said her name was Mary O'Sullivan, and she was from the county Limerick. Oh, you're a long way from home, he said. I'm going into service for a farmer in County Galway, she said, and I seem to have got myself a bit lost. Oh, you're a bit lost, all right, said Gertine. And then suddenly he heard himself saying, you know, I'm a bit short of help here myself. I was wondering that if I was prepared to pay the same amount of money as that farmer over in County Galway, would you come and work for me? Well, Mary thought about it for a minute and she agreed. Well, Gertine was delighted, and he showed her down to the house and he showed her all around it. And then he set off and he picked the mushrooms and they had breakfast together. Now, Mary, she was a hard-working woman. She went through that house and she cleaned and she polished. She cooked and she baked. And she washed and ironed and mended the clothes. And at night, she sat by the fire and darned all the socks. But there was one thing. When Gertine went out to the fields every day, and if you lived close to his house, you would see a change in Mary. You would see that she was a troubled woman. She would quickly get through her chores every day, and then she would start searching. She started in the kitchen, and she went through all the dishes in the dresser, and down into the cutlery drawers, and down underneath where the linens were kept. Then she got a stool and she climbed up and moved all the ornaments at the back of the dresser. And then when she was up there, she noticed a ledge. It was up high on the wall, up close to where the thatch was. And she moved the stool around and felt all around that ledge. Then she went into the pantry and searched behind the cans of milk and the bowls of cream. Now Gertine, he came home early from the fields one day, and he found her above in the loft, and she had a family chest tipped over, and she was going through the contents of it. He never caught on to what she might be searching for. Well, he had other things on his mind. Christmas came, and she didn't go home, and he didn't remark on it, not knowing how she was situated with her own people. And then the long days and warm days and bright days of spring came. And you know what? It was younger that Gertine was feeling. And no day went by without him putting on a collar and a tie, a thing he'd never have done before. And then one night, when they were sitting by the fire talking, he reached out to Mary and he took her hand and he said, "In the time that you've been working here for me, Mary, you must know that I have grown very, very fond of you. Would you marry me?" "No," she said. "I cannot marry you now, Gertine. You must have patience. That's what you must have." Well, he respected her wishes and no more was said about it. And life continued on. Gertine going out into the fields every day, and Mary continued with her searching. She had searched every nook and cranny in the house by now, and she went out into the yard. She went through along all the ledges in the hayshed, and from there she went into the cow byre, and then down into the hen house, and even reached in under where the hens were laying their eggs and got pecked on the hand for her trouble. She walked through the yard, looking at stones that might have something under them. There was a rusty plough she tipped over to see what might be under it. And as time went on, Gertine noticed that she was waning. The sheen had gone from her hair. The sparkle had gone out of her eyes. And she was getting very, very thin. Then the colour left her cheeks. And she became like a shadow of the Mary Sullivan that stood at his gate the year before. She continued to get weaker and weaker. And though Gertine did everything he could to save her, she died. Well, he was broken-hearted. But, as was the custom, he waked her as if she were one of his own people. And in those days, the wake would last for 3 nights. And the people in the village would come in and lay out the corpse on sheets on the kitchen table. And candles were lit all around the room. And Gertine brought in food and drink for everyone. And there were clay pipes of tobacco. And there was snuff for everyone. Well, there they all were. On the first night of the wake, the house was full. They all had kneeled down and said the prayers of the rosary. And some were sitting by the fire having a smoke and a drink. When coming up to 12 o'clock, didn't they hear the sound of horses' hooves coming into the yard? And then suddenly the door burst open and in walked a very strange man. He had a very pale complexion and piercing eyes. He walked right up to where the corpse was lying, and he nudged it with his elbow, and he said, "An Vurus an Radu da vi a Larigagat, did you find the thing that you were searching for?" And then Mary, she sat bolt upright on the table, and she said, "Me Vurus, I did not, nor a sign of it." And then she fell back down dead on the table again. And then the stranger turned on his heel and he walked out the door. And they heard the horse galloping out of the yard. Well, the sweat broke out on everyone there. And they all looked at each other and wondering what was going on. And then they all knelt down and said the rosary all over again. And I can tell you now, nobody went home that night. They hung in there. And when the morning came, they were so drowsy and half asleep that they thought that maybe it was a bad dream they had. Then it happened all over again on the second night. Well, when the stranger left on the second night, the neighbors all put their heads together, and one man said, "As soon as the sun rises, I'm going down to the presbytery to get the priest." "Oh, that's not a good idea," said Gertine. "You know that the only thing that'll come out of that is a sermon at Mass on Sunday about drinking at wakes." "Then what will we do?" said the neighbors. "Here is a riddle we can't unravel on our own." "What about Malachy Donal?" said Gertine. "He's known to all of us. And with his talks with the old people, he would have an inkling as to what's going on. And you know, he was well on the way to being ordained a priest. Sure, he knows as much as the priests do. I'll go down to his house in the morning." Well, the next morning, when Malachy Donal heard what was going on, he said, "I'll come to that wake tonight." So there they all were on the third night of the wake. And Malachy Donal was sitting there with the neighbours. And some were sitting by the fire talking in hushed tones after the rosary had been said. When coming up to 12 o'clock, didn't they hear the sound of the horses' hooves come galloping into the yard? And then the door burst open, and in came the strange man with the very pale complexion and the piercing eyes. And walking right up to where the corpse was lying, he nudged it in with his elbow again, and he said, "An Vúras an Rodú the Bhí á Loragagat, did you find the thing that you were searching for?" And again Mary sat bolt upright on the table, and she said, "Ní Vúras, I did not, nor a sign of it." And she fell back down dead on the table again. Well, the stranger turned to leave, but Malachy Donal stood in his way, and holding up his hand, he said, "I command that you give an account of the consternation you have caused in this house for 3 nights running." "Well, I was waiting for someone to ask me that," he said. Then he looked all around the room, and he said, "I'm not one of you. I'm from the other world. And in that world, our game is hurling. And we played it down in that field below there under the full moon. But we have no game now. And it's all because of that woman lying there on the table. It was her job to stand on the sideline and watch when the ball went wide. But she neglected her duty, and she lost the golden ball, and there'll be no peace in this house until we find it." Well, when Gertine heard this, he jumped to his feet and he ran out into the yard. And when he came back, he was carrying a sledgehammer. And he ran up to the wall and he smashed it. And reaching in, he pulled out the ball and he threw it to the stranger. "Is that what you're looking for?" he said. The stranger, he wiped all the mortar off it until it glistened. "Ah," he said, "our hurling ball." Then he nudged the corpse again and he said, "Come on, we'll be going now." "You're going," said Malachy Donal, "but she's not. Or do you mean to tell me that this woman who has lived in this house for so long and has sat by the fire every night, that she's one of you? Isn't she a changeling?" "She is," said the stranger. "Because between your world and ours, we have to have a go-between." "Well, then I command you to remove the spell that was put upon her and leave her here with the people who love her." Well, the stranger's face darkened with anger. And then he began to mutter some strange words. Then he made a whirling noise, and he filled the room with a thick, dark smoke. When the smoke cleared, the stranger was gone, and they heard his horse knocking sparks out of the paving stones in the yard. Gertine was the first one to notice Mary. There she was, sitting up on the table. The sheen had come back to her hair. The colour had come back to her cheeks, and the sparkle was back in her eyes. He was the first one over to her, and he took her by the two hands, and he said, "Oh, Mary, you're a free woman now, and I suppose you'll be wanting to go back to your own people. But we were happy here, and I made so bold as to ask you a certain question when you were still under the spell. Ask me again," she said, "and see what I'll say." And he did, and she said she would. And what began as a wake became more like a wedding. There was gaiety where grieving was. There was music where mourning was. There was singing where keening was. And they danced and they sang through the darkness of the night till the light of the sun peeped in the window the following morning. And that is the story of the Golden Ball. Philomena Jordan, Shane Mashkin. Thank you.
Oh. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love that old story.
Beth will mute me now.
Well,
you, thank you.
Beautiful. So beautiful, Philomena.
So now, Barry, do we have everybody muted again? Okay. I now want to introduce you to our next teller, Nan Gregory. She's a writer of award-winning stories for children, and she refers to herself as a retired storyteller who now only tells for special people, so you are hearing something special. Nan believes in the power of stories to heal and illuminate and make meaning in our lives. And these days, in this world, darkness abounds, so making peace within the trauma of our times is an ongoing journey. Now, Nan has found a couple of stories she's going to share with us tonight that reaffirm what wisdom tells us, that there can be no light without darkness, and no darkness without its light. So Nan's first story tonight is a literary tale, The Dancing Master of Kung Fu, written by Pierre de Lattre. Nan?
Thanks, Allison. And thank you, Philomena, for a lovely, lovely story. That was really, really beautiful.
Let me remind people that I'm going to remove the spotlight from Anne. So if you want to see her full screen, to go up to view and click on speaker view.
Okay. So what I wanted to tell you about this story written by Pierre de Lattre is it's one story in a collection of stories, fictional stories, that he wrote about our Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, when he was a boy, before he had to flee Tibet. So, and the story begins when a report came to the Dalai Lama about a certain master of Kung Fu who was roaming the countryside, converting young monks to the study of violence. This man had been born in Tibet, but he grew up in a neighboring country, and he was thought of as a kind of secret agent come to astonish the Tibetans with the superior power of his adopted nation, so as to soften them and open them up for conquest. This master of Kung Fu had gained his reputation by taking on 8 fierce tribesmen who attacked him on a mountain pass, killing 7 of them so quickly that the broken-legged one who survived swore that he met their attack with movements so swift he seemed simply to be walking peacefully through them while they fell dead at his feet. Now, wherever he stopped, he was surrounded by admirers, and he was always glad to demonstrate for them his dance of destruction in slow motion. And everybody who'd seen it said it was awesomely beautiful. At speed, it couldn't be seen. He seemed to be standing absolutely still. Only a rush of wind indicated that he'd whirled around, flinging out his arms and his legs in such a manner as to leave a dozen or so of the young punks who'd been trying to dodge him, grabbing parts of their bodies where he had gently, playfully flicked with hand or foot, an arm or leg, to show bones he could have broken or organs destroyed. Husky young monks began to leave the lamaseries to follow him, and yaks were slaughtered against all Buddhist laws so that they could have the black leather outfits that their master wore from his neck to his ankles, his huge muscles bulging out so that it made the leather look like his second skin. They followed him everywhere, challenging each other to duels which ended most often in serious injury and sometimes in death. When he was asked what his intentions were, the master of Kung Fu said that he was a sincere religious mystic, come to communicate certain cosmic laws taught to him by his guru. The regent and the advisors to the Dalai Lama were seriously worried, especially when the blasphemous rumor began to take root that he was the incarnation of Shiva, the Hindu god of destruction. But it was decided rather than challenging him publicly, they would follow Tibetan tradition when a man claimed religious privilege for dubious acts and invite him to visit the Dalai Lama. The master of Kung Fu strode into the great celebration hall boldly. He was a big, handsome man with thick blue-black hair hanging over his leather-clad shoulders, his teeth flashing confidently beneath a big mustache. The Dalai Lama at this time was only 10 years old, and he couldn't help but be impressed by the potent vibrations this man gave off. They reduced the monks assembled there to childish giggles and gasps. He didn't prostrate himself. He bowed gallantly, strode up to the throne where the God King sat, and said, "Your Highness, I know why you invited me here, and I don't want you to be afraid. Ugliness is my only enemy, and you are all beautiful people." A titter came from the monks. "I wouldn't dream of harming you." "What kind of harm can you do?" asked the Dalai Lama. "Oh, I don't want you to think of it as harm, Highness. I want you to think of it as help. I am a lover of beauty, as is any enlightened man. But you know, as well as I know, you can't raise up beauty in this world without getting rid of ugliness first. It's early days now. You can't see the result of my work, and maybe it looks like the opposite. But believe me, I am raising up beauty by surrounding myself by a cadre of men who are preparing the ground for it. That's why I'm recruiting from the lamaseries. There's so much ugliness in this world, so much ugliness. Someone has to do something about it, whose strength is backed by moral zeal. I can't think of a better place than here in Tibet to start my work, and I would really appreciate your help." Well, what is it exactly that you do?" asked the Dalai Lama. "Oh, Highness, listen, if you're willing, if you really want to know what I do, stand up and allow me to demonstrate for you a little dance it took me 15 years to perfect. And just because I could kill a dozen men in the course of this little dance, don't be afraid. It's just a demonstration of ugliness destruction. You won't be able to see what I do. My movements are too fast for the human eye to track. But you will feel afterwards the perfect peace that comes when ugliness has been banished. So the Dalai Lama stood up, and immediately he felt like a wind was blowing flower petals all over his body. And he looked down, he couldn't see anything. He said, you may proceed. Proceed, said the other. I've already done it. What you felt was my hand flicking all over your body. What I just did was demonstrate for you in slow motion, very slow motion, how I could have destroyed every organ in your body, one by one, in the course of that dance. With this knuckle, I could have severed the connection between your brain and your spinal cord. With the tip of this little finger, I could have rendered you impotent. With the heel of my hand, I could have made it impossible for you to excrete. With my toe, I could have broken your arm and broken your leg in the same motion with my heel. Eyes, ears, nose, throat, spleen, liver, kidneys, you name it. I could have taken them all. And the master of Kung Fu smiled proudly and flexed his muscles and surveyed his body up and down approvingly. You see, Highness, if you want that peace, demons inside and out must be exterminated. They come into being and disappear so fast you can't see them, but I have taught myself to see them everywhere. I catch them and I kill them before they can escape, the same way you kill flies. I don't kill flies, said the Dalai Lama, and a murmur of approval came from the monks. The Dalai Lama was relieved to find that his compatriots hadn't been completely seduced. No, he said, in Tibet we don't kill flies. Well, said the master of Kung Fu, well, be that as it may, Tibet is full of illness because of the flies. In the country where I come from, there's very little illness because every man knows how to catch a fly. I wasn't raised in the serenity of a palace, you know. I was raised in the streets of a city, like your Lhasa, only much bigger. I looked at eyes muddied by staring through fumes of putrefaction at images of capitalistic lust. I heard mouths speaking to their supposed inferiors in words of disgust and hatred. I have known hearts to beat with excitement at the torture of innocent men. I have seen gluttons with distended stomachs riding on the backs of starvelings. I have witnessed legs trembling pathetically to hold up bodies poisoned by chemicals. I have seen ears bending eagerly to soak up rumors and gossip and half-truths and greedy evangelisms of all sorts. In short, I have seen corruption in every part of the human body, and I have taken it upon myself to destroy it completely. And once it's destroyed, asked the Dalai Lama. It's destroyed. My art may seem preliminary, but it is final, and I am its master. I know a master greater than you. I don't want to insult you. I would hate to be rude, Highness, but I doubt that very much. Oh, yes, I have a champion who can best you. Bring him on. If he bests me, I'll leave Tibet immediately. If he bests you, you'll have no reason to leave Tibet. And the Dalai Lama looked over at the monks to see if they shared his confidence, but they all looked disconsolate. And his huge guards were all looking away for fear that he might choose one of them, and the others were looking at the guards, clearly convinced that none of them would stand a chance. The Dalai Lama clapped his hands. "Regent," he said, "summon the dancing master, and while we wait, let's have tea." The tea ceremony had just about finished when the regent returned with the dancing master. He was a wiry little fellow, about half the size of the master of Kung Fu and well past his prime. His legs were wreathed with varicose veins, his elbows were swollen with arthritis, but nevertheless his eyes sparkled cheerily, and he seemed eager for the challenge. The master of Kung Fu did not scorn him. He said, "My guru was smaller than you and older than you, and it took me 15 years to kill him. I could have taken him out easily had I been able to catch him, but he was too fast for me. And then last year, I caught him by his ear and destroyed him the same way I will destroy you when you tire." And just to show you that I know your methods, I'm going to invite you to attack me at will. Your puny hands cannot hurt me while I'm at full strength. And he took a nonchalant kind of stance, as if he was teasing the old man to attack him. Can I just say that I don't think that I'm on the screen anymore. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, so shall I just keep on going?
Yes, Nan, I can see you. Melanie here.
Yeah, okay. So, sorry. It was a little disconcerting. I saw somebody's little postage stamp. Okay. So, where was I? Okay, so he says, attack me at will. And he takes this indifferent stance, just waiting for the old man to attack. Well, the dancing master began to twirl very slowly, and his robes rose and wafted around him. His arms lifted and his hands began to tremble like butterflies' wings as they reached for his opponent's eyes. And then very gently, for just a moment, they touched his eyebrows, and the master of Kung Fu stepped back, astonished. All of a sudden, the celebration hall was vibrant with the rich hues of singing color. The monks' faces were radiant with beauty. It was as if his eyes had been washed clean for the first time in his life. The dancing master stroked the nose of the master of Kung Fu, and suddenly he could smell pungent barley from a granary in the city far below. He could smell butter melting in the most fragrant of teas as the Dalai Lama sipped and watched calmly. A flick from the dancing master's foot at his genitals, and the master of Kung Fu's penis swelled with desire. The sound of a woman's voice coming from an open window filled him with longing, exquisite longing, to hold her and caress her. He found himself taking off his leather outfit until he was standing naked in front of the dancing master, who was assaulting him with joy at every touch. His body began to hum like a finely tuned instrument. He could hear the great longhorns resounding in 1,000 rooms of the Potala, praising creation. He threw back his head and sang like a bird at sunrise. He felt like he had many arms and legs and hands, all of them wanting to nourish the blossoming of life. And then the master of Kung Fu and the dancing master of Tibet together began the most beautiful dance that had ever been seen in the celebration hall of the Potala, ever. It lasted for 3 days and 3 nights, during which everyone in Tibet feasted, and there was no sorrow and no sickness and no death, and visitors shoved in the doors and the galleries, taking turns to watch. And when at last the master of Kung Fu fell exhausted at the feet of the Dalai Lama, he saw lying there dying the old dancing master. But the dancing master was dying happily, because he knew in this final marvelous dance he had found the disciple he had been yearning for. And the new dancing master of Tibet picked up the body of the old one and, weeping with love, drew in the last of its energy. He had never felt so strong.
Abigail? All right. Abegael Fisher-Lang is a longtime storyteller of British Columbia. She has hosted the North Vancouver Crick Crack since 2000, and she is the British Columbia representative for Storytellers of Canada. And for those of you from the United States, that's the comparable organization to National Storytelling Network. She longs for a well-told epic and mythic tales to enliven us all in these troubling times. And as a life cycle celebrant, Abegail shapes stories that are based on ceremonies of hatchin', matchin', and dispatchin' to celebrate the joys and struggles of our lifetimes. Now, the story she has chosen for this concert arises from that work, and it is a tale that's close to home for her because tonight she will weave 2 story threads, a Baba Yaga legend and the images of her mother's life and recent passing. So please welcome Abegael Fisher-Lang.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Philomena and Nan for the remarkable tales. In a densely forested land, there once lived a merchant, his wife, and their young daughter. She was so good and kind that she was called Vasilisa the Wise. When she was in her 9th year, her mother became gravely ill and spoke to her. "My dear, I am dying. With my blessing and my love, I leave you this doll. Keep her with you always and do not show her to anyone. When you are in trouble, feed her a few morsels from your dinner and ask for her help. She will always be true to you." And then she kissed her daughter, turned away, and soon died. My mother was abandoned at birth, perhaps even orphaned. It was said that she was given to another family to settle a debt, though it is not clear who was the indebted. At any rate, it is clear that there was no doll of blessing for my mother. Many years later, my sister and brother and I would grow up with no family stories, for my mother never spoke of her upbringing. And my father curiously cut all his family ties, perhaps to mirror my mother's sense of abandonment. So we grew up with no happy family reunions, no long-lost cousins, no long-lost cousins arriving in the middle of the night. Only a bony shadow passing through the house silently. Many years later, my brother did a DNA test for my mother. She was in her 80s then. And we found that she was mostly Ashkenazi Jew from the Ukraine. Her ancestors would have had big, noisy families. Mothers would have given dolls to daughters and told them the old stories of Baba Yaga. The merchant mourned for his wife, and one day he began looking for a new wife to help raise his daughter. There were many women in the village, but he chose a widow with 2 daughters around the same age as his own. He married her, yet he was deceived. She was not the kindly mother she had pretended. She tormented Vasilisa morning and night and made her work as a house servant long hours. Vasilisa never complained a bit. In fact, she grew lovelier and more gracious in nature, while the stepmother and the sisters grew scrawny and cross from spite. Of course, it was the doll who was helping her. And every night she would feed her morsels and speak to her and say, "Dolly, I am in a terrible situation. I live in my father's fine house, but my wicked stepmother is driving me from the white world. Please help me, Dolly." And the dolly would nibble and smile and assure her that all would be well, that she would help her every day. And so she did. Every day the dolly did all the cooking and the cleaning and fired up the stove and tended the garden. And Vasilisa played outside just as a child should, played in the sun and rested. My mother went to a Catholic girls' school in Halifax. She loved reading, especially Anne of Green Gables, because Anne also was an orphan who loved reading and had a lot to say. She said things like, "Tomorrow is a new day. If you're going to be imagining anyway, you might as well imagine something good. Kindred spirits are everywhere." So Vasilisa had the doll of her mother's blessing, but my mother had Anne's good advice. When she finished school, my mother enrolled in normal college, which was common in those days, to learn stenography. But she married young, pregnant with me, her firstborn, at age 20. She and my father would move to a Navy base, HMCS Cornwallis, in the Annapolis Valley on the south shore of Nova Scotia, for 12 endless years. My father was a musician in the Navy band and was away at sea for long stretches of time. My mother entered the dark forest alone, not knowing when the light would come. The stepmother grew more bitterly enraged by Vasilisa. She began to plot a way to be rid of her. And when the merchant went away for a long period of time in far-off lands, she moved the family to a small house near a great, dense, dark forest where it was known Baba Yaga lived, caught children and ate them. The stepmother planned how to send her there. One night the stepmother went to her room and the 3 girls sat at the table around a single candle doing their handwork, knitting, lace making, weaving. And the eldest girl blew out the candle. "Oh," wailed the sisters, "there's no light to do our work. What shall we do? We must go to Baba Yaga and get some light." And the eldest said, "There is light enough on my lace pins. I need not go." And the second one said, "There is light on my knitting needles. I need not go." And they turned to Vasilisa. "You must go. Go to Baba Yaga for light." And they pushed her out of the room. She slipped upstairs to her dolly and fed her and wept. "I have to go into the forest to Baba Yaga. She will surely eat me." "No, she won't," said the dolly. "Take me with you. No harm will come." And she smiled, and her 2 little eyes shone like bright candles. My mother was very creative and resourceful. She sewed and altered her clothes. She made hats out of remnants, Barbie doll clothes out of scraps. I found lots of old family photos, all of us skating on the rink at the base, wearing Mary Maxim sweaters knit by my mother, standing in our Girl Guide cob and brownie uniforms, grinning in homemade Halloween costumes, making a snow house in the backyard. We picked blueberries at Bear River. We watched Bonanza together on Sunday nights. So there were lots of happy family times when we were young. But even in the early years, my mother began to withdraw. She slept in bed most mornings. So I made lunches and breakfasts for my sister, brother, and myself. After school, I cleaned the house. I made the dinner. There were no ends of errands for a dutiful child aiming to please. My mother was afraid of fierce maritime storms. When thunder boomed overhead and lightning cracked and the whole house shook, she would sit in the dark on the top of the basement stairs, smoking, holding her purse. She was terrified of the dark forces of nature and could not be comforted. Perhaps if there had been a doll with two little eyes like candles, it would have been good. Vasilisa started walking through the forest. She was afraid and trembling. She held that little doll so close. She walked, and a horseman went riding by. He was all dressed in white. The horse was white. And as he passed, daybreak brightened the forest. Another horseman went galloping by. He was all dressed in red, and the horse was red. And when he passed, the sun rose red in the sky. She walked and walked. Hours passed. She came to a clearing, and there was the ancient hut of Baba Yaga scratching around the yard on long, hideous chicken legs. And around the house was a fence made of human bones, spikes with human skulls with great eye sockets, and posts made of human legs, and bolts made of human hands, and a great lock on the gate made with a large human mouth with sharp, long teeth. A horseman came riding by. He was all dressed in black on a black horse. He leapt through the gate and he vanished under the hut of Baba Yaga. And then darkness came. All the eye sockets gleamed with inner fire, illuminating the glade. Vasilisa was terrified. She wanted to run from that place, but her legs would not move. Death is a wild night and a new road, wrote Emily Dickinson. It is 6 a.m. on Monday morning. It's the day of the new moon. I am at the beach with 8 other women. We are going to swim in the sunrise. We light candles and set them in the damp sand, choose rocks to carry our pain, throw them into the waves, and then we plunge in. Afterwards, cold yet exhilarated, I am at home running a warm bath when the call comes. It is from Luther Court, my mother's home in Victoria. The nurse says that she has stopped eating and drinking and is transitioning at end of life. I cancel the week, my appointments, my work. I pack the car. I take the little suitcase that is my wake box from the attic. The next day I'm on the first ferry. I arrive at Luther Court. The nurse tells me, your mother has been talking to her own mother. That's amazing. She was an orphan. I said she didn't know her real mother in life. And then I imagined, was she meeting her birth mother? Was her birth mother welcoming her from the other side? And then I wondered if her birth mother, my grandmother, was a strong woman who loved the forces of nature and might have set worthy tasks for my mother, as Baba Yaga did. Or would she have been a gentlewoman, like Vasilisa's mother, giving a doll of blessing? Was my mother now traveling between the sense world and the imaginal world, meeting her ancestors, finding her own inner fire for this new adventure she was on? Baba Yaga arrives. She's in her mortar and pestle and sweeping her traces with the broom. She arrives and looks around and says, "Fie, fie, I smell a Russian. Who is here?" Vasilisa says, "It is I, grandmother. I have been sent to get light from my stepsisters." "I know them. Stay with me for a while. If you work well, I will give you light. If not, I will eat you." Baba Yaga walks through the gate and Vasilisa follows. She walks into the hut and Vasilisa follows. She asks Vasilisa to set all the food on the stove on the table, and there is enough food for 10 men. And there is kvass and meat and beer and wine, and Baba Yaga sits and eats it all, leaving a little soup, a little bread, a little meat for Vasilisa. She tells her all the tasks to be done the following day, the cleaning and the cooking and the tending and the sweeping, and says, and in the corn bin, sort out all the wheat. Do this, or I will eat you. And then Baba Yaga goes to bed. She snores. Her nose rattles against the roof of the hut. And Vasilisa sits with her doll and feeds her and asks for her help. And the doll reminds her, she says, "Be at peace, Vasilisa. Say your prayers, go to sleep, and remember, the morning is wiser than the evening. The morning is wiser than the evening." As I go up to my mother's floor, I remember the last time I had visited her a few weeks earlier. We sat in the garden and I had poems and prayers and songs and a little bell, and I wasn't sure if she recognized me. And then she said, "Did Abegael send you?" "Yes," I said, and then I knew. "Is that Abigail's dress? She likes those bright flowered flowing dresses." "Yes, it is her dress." "Are you studying how to do this?" "Actually, I am." "Well, you're doing a good job. I feel better now." "Oh, that's good. Thank you for telling me." "Be sure to tell Abegael I said so." "I will." My mother knew very little about what I did at end-of-life work. But she would often say, "I know people pay you to do that sort of thing, but I'm telling you, mark my words, none of that for me when I'm at end of life. Like, no blessings, no service. Who would come?" Sometimes later she'd say, "Well, maybe just one prayer would be fine." So now I enter her room. She's in a deep sleep, her mouth in an open vowel shape. Her features are all chiseled, her brow, her nose, her chin, just like alabaster. There's a little teddy bear on her chest, which is rising and falling with every breath. I notice her legs or arms are moving a little restlessly. I announce myself. I tell her I have a few things to say. I remembered her instructions, but I felt things had changed. So I told her, "All your work is done. You are at peace to return to the light. You are beloved. All is forgiven." The next morning, Baba Yaga is in her mortar with her pestle, pumping her way against the sky. When Vasilisa looks out and sees her leaving, she sees the white horse running by. She sees the red horse galloping by. The sun is rising red. She notices that all the tasks have been done by her doll. She thanks her doll, and she rests for the day. Time passes. The black horse comes riding by, and night falls. The eyes and the skulls are gleaming bright. Baba Yaga returns. She looks around to see if the tasks are done, and they are all done well, and she is infuriated. She calls, "My faithful servants, come and grind the wheat." And 3 pairs of hands mysteriously appear, take the wheat, and vanish. Baba Yaga sits down again for an enormous meal, and she tells Vasilisa all the tasks for the next day and says, "Tomorrow, clean out the poppy seeds. Tomorrow, clean out the poppy seeds." And then she sleeps and she snores, and Vasilisa speaks to her dolly again, and the dolly reminds her that the morning is wiser than the evening. At my mother's bedside, my training as a death doula kicks in. I know I am there to serve her and the grieving family. Except I am the grieving family too, the only one in the room. My brother and sister had left my mother many years before. My brother lives in Ontario and was unreachable. My sister, sadly, had passed 2 years previously. She had chosen medically assisted dying and had not used the time to reach out and make peace with my mother. We never know really if we're going to be at the bedside when someone passes. Story is the sturdiest vessel we have. Yet, if there have not been many good shared life stories, it's hard to sit with an aging parent who's angry and resentful, regretful. Where are the healing memories that can help? Yet, it is a blessing to be with them at end of life, at the threshold, deep in the mystery, deep in the peace that passes all understanding. Early the next morning, excuse me, Baba Yaga again leaves. The day passes. She returns. She looks to see if all the work is done, and it has been well done, and she is infuriated again. She calls for her servants. "My faithful servants, come and press the poppy seeds, the oil from the poppy seeds." And again, these mysterious 3 pairs of hands appear, take the poppy seeds and vanish. And then she turns to Vasilisa. "Why do you not speak to me? You stand there as if you were dumb." Vasilisa says, I've been afraid to speak, but by your leave, I may ask a question." "Ask anything you want, but know that not every question has a good answer. And if you ask too much, you will know too much and get old fast." On my way here, I passed a white horse, a white rider. Who was he? He is my bright day. I passed a red rider on a red horse. Who was he? He is my bright sun. I passed a black rider on a black horse. He is my dark night. Those 3 are my faithful servants. Any more questions? Vasilisa thought about those 3 pairs of hands, which were so mysterious, but she did not ask. Baba Yaga said, "Let me ask you a question then. How is it you do this work so well and so quickly?" "My mother's blessing helps me." "So that's it. Get out of here, you blessed daughter. I'll have no blessed things in this house." The morning is wiser than the evening. On Friday morning, I awake early and I know my mother has passed. After our 3 days together, she passed in the middle of the night on her own. I enter her room for the last time. I kiss her on the forehead and I say the Celtic blessing, may your going be easeful, may your welcome be assured. The nurses have washed her body in the night, so now I prepare her anointing. I open my little wake box and I pull out the veils, the silk veils, the candles, the aromatic oils, the tools for my trade for these last tasks. I blend the rose, lavender, and frankincense oils in my hands. I touch and anoint each part of her body with reverence. I honor your brow, the birthplace of thought. I honor your eyes that have loved the beauty of the earth. I honor your ears that have loved music. I honor your nostrils, the gateway of breath. I honor your lips that have loved to talk and laugh. I anoint her whole body in this way. I marvel at her long, white, smooth legs, just like alabaster, and her little feet, which are so at rest now, after having been cramped for so long. And then I decide to dress her in her favorite blue gown. I talk both of us through it. Mom, it's your favorite. I slip it over her head. So far, so good. The left arm goes well easily into the sleeve, but the right arm will not budge. I think I should have done this hours ago. I bunch it up a little bit, but then I get out my silks and I cover her in clouds of white and rose-colored silks. I look inside my wake box for the scissors for flowers, and I see there a little doll made by my daughter when she was about 9. I often have various things in there for various situations. I take the dolly out and I put it in the bed with my mom. And I think about Vasilis's doll. And then I think, if the doll of blessing has not come from the ancestors, perhaps it will come from the children. Then I go downstairs with my little scissors and I cut leaves and blossoms and vines and come back up and I dress her beautifully with flowers all around her head, with cascades of vines down her legs, with a rose at her throat, a little candle on a gold saucer on her chest next to the little teddy bear. And then I sing to her. I light the candle and I sing. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. I thank my mother for giving me life, and for my siblings' lives, for my children and grandchildren's lives. I tell her that she is beloved here on the earth and now in the spirit realms. And then I ask for her blessing. I say, there is a lot of work to be done here. Do not turn your back on this wounded family. And then I get a bit cross. I feel myself wrestling with Azrael, the angel of her passing. I take a breath. I thank her then. I say, if you can help, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Baba Yaga pushes Vasilisa out of the house, out through the gates, and she takes a spike with a blazing skull on top and hands it to her and says, "Here, take this to your stepsisters. This is what they've always wanted." And Vasilisa walks through the forest by the light of the skull, which is bright at night and dim in the day. And when she gets home, she goes to throw the skull down and she hears a voice coming that says, "Take me to your stepmother." So she walks in the house with a lit skull. For the first time, she is kindly greeted. And she is told that since she had left, no light had remained lit in that house. And now her stepmother says, "Perhaps your light will last. Perhaps your light will last." And the skull turns and stares at the stepmother and then at the two stepsisters. And they turn away and try to run, but the skull follows them with its blazing eyes. And in the morning, they are turned to ashes. Unharmed, Vasilisa buries the skull in the garden and goes into town. When my mother is beautifully laid out in silks with flowers all around her and fragrant with oils, all the nurses come in to say goodbye to her. And the elderly residents on her floor, they come in and they greet her and pay their respects. This might be the beginning of a 3-day wake that Philomena spoke about. A time when people would come by and be together and grieve and sing and cook food and play games and just be with the dying. But that's not in the stars for my mother this lifetime. For as she said herself, who will come? I call the funeral home and ask who they will send to pick up the body. "Oh, a professional," I'm told. "That's just it," I say, remembering the last time 2 tall, silent young men in black livery arrived to pick up a body. "That's just it," I said. "I don't want professional. I want warm and comforting." A phone call comes. It's from my Airbnb. "Can I move out by 11 o'clock? "What? Oh, no, I'm sorry. I've totally got confused about the dates. Look, my mother has just died. I'm waiting for the funeral director. Could I have a few more hours?" "Yes." And then the most beautiful of funeral directors arrives. Her name is Diane. And we greet each other like long-lost sisters. And together we take the flowers and the silks off my mother's body. I tuck the little dolly away. And then she turns to me and says, "Now I will do the shrouding. Would you like to leave the room?" "No, I would like to stay." I watch as she moves my mother as if they were dancing, and she wraps her head and her body in a blue swirl of sheet. And then she turns to me and says, "Are you okay?" "Yes." "In all my years of doing this work, you're the first person to stay in the room for the shrouding." Well, my mother spent so much time lonely and alone. I thought I would be part of this journey as far as I could. And then she zips my mother into a red sleeping bag and covers her with a homemade quilt, and she's on the gurney. And then the chaplain, Ed, comes and we leave together. We have to walk through the common room where all the other resident elders are eating lunch. It's the only way to the elevator. And as we walk through, Ed at the front, and then me, and then my mother in her last warm bed being pushed by Diane. As we walk through, Ed calls out, "We give thanks for Lee. We give thanks for Lee." And a number of the residents who I've come to know during the week smile and wave, or they applaud as we go by. To the elevator, down to the parking lot, into the van, hugs all around. Diane reminds me to pick up the ashes. After they leave, my mother and Diane, I go to my Airbnb and check out. And then I drive to the ocean and I plunge in. And so this extraordinary week ends the way it began, in deep, cold, salt water. Here's a little dolly.
Thank you so much, Abigail.
Thank you.
That was powerful. I know you
Thank you.
worked hard. Well, everyone, we have one last very short story, and we're going to hear from Nan Gregory again to share a pre-classical Greek myth.
Oh wait, can you hear me? Okay, wait. I have to turn the light on. I'm running from the bed. Hang on.
Nan runs from the heat.
I did. I ran from the wood. But I want to tell you something, Abigail. Abigail, I'm not your mom, but I bless you. Really bless you.
Thank you.
You
Nan.
deserve blessing. It was beautiful. And honestly, if anybody deserves blessing, you deserve blessing. So there you are.
Thank you, my dearest friend. I feel blessed.
And know that while Nan's getting ready, that we're all going to have a chance to talk to the tellers in just a little bit.
Oh, now I have to turn on the light. Wait. Okay. Okay, so here I am. I think you can see me. Okay, here we are. This is a Palladian Greek myth, and I don't know if you can see me, but anyway, I'll just tell it to you. Yes, pre-classical Greece. In the beginning, there was nothing and no one except Eurynome. Eurynome was a dancer, and a dancer needs a place to tap her pretty feet. So Eurynome split the sky from the sea and danced naked on the surface of the waves. But this was the beginning, and there was nothing and no one except Eurynome, and it was dark and it was cold. So Eurynome danced to the east, and she danced to the south, and she danced for the west, looking for a friend. But there was nothing and no one but Eurynome. So she danced to the north, and it was cold up there. And so she danced faster and faster, and the motion of her hips wound the sky into a wind. And she took that wind in her two hands and she molded it into the shape of a great snake. And she called that snake Ophion. And Ophion took one look at Eurynome and fell in love. Hey, he said, you want to dance? Well, she said, as a matter of fact, I am already dancing. Do you want to dance with me? And she looked him up and she looked him down. All right, she said. And Ophion coiled himself 7 times around her, and they danced on the surface of the waves. Now, the north wind is a very fertile wind. You can ask any farmers how his mares like to stand with their backs to the north wind, and when it blows over their big buttocks, they grow great with child, even when no stallion is anywhere around. So knowing this, it won't surprise you to learn that dancing in Ophion's embrace, Eurynome conceived a child. And the moment she felt that baby in her, she changed herself into a dove, and she flew and she flew and she flew over the dark waters until she came to term. And then she laid a gigantic silver egg on the surface of the waves, and she said to Ophion, you keep this warm. And Ophion wrapped himself 7 times, oh so gently, around that egg until it hatched. And when it hatched, the sun and the moon and the stars and the glorious earth herself came whirling out, and the earth was already perfect, clothed with growing green, and all the creatures that crawl and swim and fly and love were already living there in harmony. In the beginning, there was nothing and no one except Uriname.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, Nan. And before we give accolades that are so well deserved to all our tellers, I just want you to know in just a moment we're going to open up the chat. So if you have any questions, or feel free to type them in there. And I want to thank everybody that joined us tonight. Thank our tellers and all the folks that came to listen. And I'm sorry you had to jump through so many hurdles because of Zoom changing tonight. Who knew? And our tech staff, oh my gosh, without them, this would be impossible. Yes, Barry and Ann, you deserve awards tonight. And remember, everybody, if you want to donate, go to SeattleStorytellers.org. Scroll down, you'll see the donate jar that says SSG. And you can get information about using PayPal or sending it through the mail. We want to keep having exciting programming that we can bring to you every month. And hopefully in the future, the months will be easier and Zoom won't decide to do a makeover on the night that we have our concert. So
Anna's got her purple hat on.
Yeah.
There's the purple hat, and we certainly welcome your donations.